Today I stand on High Street in Shrewsbury, the street in which Paula Ebben grew up as the youngest of 11 children. She is now a CBS Boston news anchor and has covered major news, gaining national recognition. Today Paula opened up with me about her childhood in Shrewsbury, her journey in TV news, her accomplishments, and her personal endeavors.
Paula's parents moved to Shrewsbury in 1954. Her father was a urologist at St. Vincent's Hospital, and her mother a stay-at-home mom to 11 children who was extremely active in the community. Her parents were part of the group of community members who helped build St. Mary's Church and School, where a majority of Paula's favorite memories in Shrewsbury took place. Paula believes her childhood and family helped shape her into who she would become and was the initial force behind her wanting to become a reporter.
It was just such a magical childhood for me because when I was little and then going to elementary school at St. Mary's, right near the center of town, most of my siblings were in high school or college or medical school or law school and beyond, So I grew up really in a whole world of a lot of adults and teenagers, and I was really the only small child left in the family. So it's always interesting. I tell people I grew up with all these siblings, yet I was alone with my parents a lot. I was the only one who really had the benefit of spending a lot of time just with my mom and dad, which was really special. But as for my mother's family, she came from a family of journalists and writers. Her parents and her grandparents had written for newspapers in Boston. And my father, it was sort of in my blood. So we spent a lot of time around the dinner table talking about current events and news. And my father was the first in his family to go to college. His father was a Boston police officer, and a lot of his uncles and relatives had worked in factories when they came from Ireland in the late 1800s. So his parents were determined that he was going to get an education and become a doctor as he wanted to be. So like a lot of immigrant families, school was everything. Education was everything. And I think that my mother's family had been so literary, and my father's family spent so much time investing in education and talking about how important it was for your future. That was all we talked about. A lot of my older brothers and sisters, all of them, have gone on to do wonderful things, and they're just really brilliant, interesting people. And that's because of my mom and dad. So personally, I used to laugh and tell my children, I think I wanted to become a reporter because when I was little, I felt as though there was nothing I could ever know that they didn't already know. They were so well-read and so smart, and because I was a little elementary school age girl, but they were in high school and college and beyond, I would be sitting there listening to their conversations. So it was a great education, and you had to be on your toes and use a good broadcasting voice to get a word in edgewise at a dinner table like that. Heard. That's right. So it really affected me personally and professionally.
Outside of her family and upbringing, Paula specifically remembers one moment of TV news that made her know she wanted to jump into the exciting industry.
When I came home and we had the television on, there was a special report graphic came up. And I remember in the fall, it was that Pope John Paul II had been shot. Later on that year, it was that Anwar Sadat had been assassinated in Egypt. And then in March of that year, President Reagan was shot. And I just remember being riveted to the coverage and the way it unfolded in the hours after a huge global event like that. And because, of course, my mother was the the daughter of newspaper people, she always drew us in to whatever was happening. I remember being really little and sitting with her while she watched the Watergate hearings. She just loved news.
Absolutely.
And so I specifically remember the ABC anchorman at the time was Frank Reynolds. And he was at the anchor desk, and it was really stunning since, of course, President Kennedy, there had been an attempt on President Ford's life, but it was a pretty minor incident. So the shooting of President Reagan was shocking and right on the sidewalk in broad daylight. So I was really fascinated, and I remember seeing in those days, anchor men mostly were always middle-aged, men in gray suits and very serious and still.
Yeah.
And it was all very formal, not as we are now, as a lot of anchor people just are themselves on the air.
Right.
And I just remember this one electric moment where Frank Reynolds was clearly waiting for information, and he was kind of vamping about the president's condition at the hospital and that Mrs. Reagan was coming. And a hand came in from off camera in front of him. And so it was obviously a producer,
Right.
handing him a ripped piece of paper. And the producer must have scribbled the president's condition on the ripped piece of paper. So Frank Reynolds, this very formal, it broke the moment. And he took the paper and started talking to the person off camera, and he was saying, I'm not going to read this. I don't know if this is true. I think it seemed too casual to him that somebody was just quickly handing him something. I don't know if it had said the president might be dead, whatever it was, but I thought, oh, yeah, there are other people there, and they're getting the information, and then they're getting it to him, and and I thought, that's where I want to be.
Following in her father's and 4 older siblings' footsteps, Paula attended Boston College and received a degree in English, which led her into the next stage of her life.
BC, for me, I loved the English department there. I was very involved in the Dramatic Society and the University Chorale. I sang with and had the opportunity to go on great trips with them, which was really fun. And I met my husband there. So of course, it was a real turning point for me. It was the time I first left Shrewsbury, and meeting my husband Bill meant that it really led me to the path for the rest of my life, which is very special, and now we have a daughter there.
After having 4 children in 6 years with her husband Bill, Paula became a stay-at-home mom for 9 years. When she decided to go back to work, Paula knew she had to go after her passion of TV news. She got her start very close to her hometown at WGMC in Worcester, which eventually led to her journey at CBS.
While I was at WGMC in Worcester, New England cable news absorbed them. And I showed my tape to the people at Neckin, and they put me on the air at Neckin in Newton.
Fantastic.
And I was on the air there and put on the anchor desk to try that out a couple of times. And the news director here at WBZ saw me and asked me to come work here. So yeah, so it was a sort of very different circuitous route into TV news, but I was very lucky and the timing was good. And I think that because I had stayed home with my children and I went back to work when I was slightly older, I looked old enough to be on the air in the Boston market, and that helped.
Paula began her career at CBS as a freelance reporter, moving her way up to weekend evening anchor, to then morning anchor, now to weeknight evening anchor, covering major stories all along the way.
I was able to go with some really talented photographers and producers to cover the royal wedding in London, and to cover the canonization of the 2 popes in Rome. And I've been to the White House to interview the First Lady. So Boston is such a big, important local news market, but it really gives you the opportunity to do a lot of really interesting national and international stories as well.
In 2013, Paula and the CBS News team received a Peabody Award for their work covering the Boston Marathon bombing, and in 2014 received a Columbia DuPont Award for their coverage. Paula opened up about the experience of covering such a tragic event.
So everybody obviously knows what happened, and all I can tell you from being inside was you can't imagine the spirit, the sense of responsibility, the number of hours that people here worked. There were people who would go home to change and be right back in here that whole week from Monday to Friday night. And it was a tremendous team effort. It really was. And for everybody down to photographers and editors and people who never slept, they really earned that award, those 2 awards.
All her wonderful experiences and memories, Paula looks with excitement to the future.
I'm happy doing what I'm doing and hope it can continue as long as possible.